Facts about history that they probably didn't even teach you in school. Most of y'all probably ain't learned nothing in school, but I'm just joking. But look, man, good vibes always over here, man. Look, make sure y'all smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, and let's get into this video.
So now I'm going to show you some maps that have giants and mermaids. Roll this footage.
This is a 1544 map of the Americas by Sebastian Munster. In the video last month, we covered the Sea of Verrazano and the story behind its discovery. But there are more interesting features on this map, one of which are the Latin words Regio Gigantum. This translates to the region of giants. This map isn't alone. If we search the term giants, depictions of giants in the same region pop up. Giants certainly don't live here today, so who were these giants and what happened to them? The first sightings by Europeans of these giants was in 1520 by Ferdinand Magellan and his crew on his circumnavigation of the world. Magellan was killed before making it back to Spain, but his assistant Antonio Pigafetta wrote this: "One day we saw a naked man of giant structure on the shore of the port, dancing, singing, and throwing dust on his head. When the giant was in the captain general's and our presence, he marveled greatly, and made signs with one finger raised upwards, believing that we had come from the sky. He was so tall that we reached only to his waist, and he was well proportioned." Magellan named these giants Patagons. While Pigafetta never explained Magellan's reasons for the name, it's been long assumed that pata came from a Portuguese and Spanish word to mean foot, though he may have taken the name from a literary figure in a Spanish novel of the early 16th century. Either way, the name eventually stuck, and the region became known as Patagonia, which is interpreted to mean land of the big feet. Magellan allegedly captured two giants to take back to Spain and prove their existence. But like Magellan and the majority of his men, the giants didn't survive the journey, and apparently their remains were disposed of. But it didn't matter if there was tangible proof. The Spanish accounts began to appear on maps. In 1579, Sir Francis Drake's ship chaplain, Francis Fletcher, also wrote about meeting very tall natives on their circumnavigation. Men in height and greatness, so extraordinary that they hold no comparison with any of the sons of men this day in the world.
I wonder how many people go through life and never ask this question. What year is it really? How do we know that it's the year 2023? Now listen, the Bible you hold in your hand is technically an ancient text that's thousands of years old, and it gives a genealogy that claims to go...
I mean, it even lied to you right here. You know what I'm saying? That should be lied to you, but whatever.
Back to the first two human beings who ever existed. The same genealogy that Jesus Christ is connected to, recorded in Matthew 1 and Luke chapter 3. And it puts times 0 at about 4000 BC. They didn't tell us in school that people hundreds of years ago literally were developing these dates from the Bible, such as Archbishop James Ussher, Isaac Newton, and Martin Luther. But thing is, I think these guys are actually wrong, because they were using the Hebrew Masoretic copy, which dates to 1008 AD. And in Genesis chapter 11, this genealogy is missing 650 years that you'd never know were missing unless you compared it to the Greek Septuagint, which predates it by over 1,000 years. Both the Samaritan Pentateuch and 1st century historian Flavius Josephus have a copy of Genesis chapter 11 that agrees with the Septuagint, which puts the final date at something closer to 4600 BC.
You may have heard me say Oklahoma is the capital of black towns, having more still in existence than any other state. But Oklahoma had an early Chinatown as well. Chinese people built a safe haven connected by underground tunnels in Oklahoma City. Let me tell you about it. I'm the young black mayor, your #1 history influencer. Chinese immigrants were lured to America with the promises of riches during the gold rush of 1848. By 1880, 2 million of them had made it to San Francisco. By 1882, Congress passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned all Chinese immigration, but not before all of our railroads had been built. The Chinese faced extensive racism, and it was no different in Oklahoma. Some places passed Jim Crow-like laws, forbidding Chinese men from marrying white women. So across American cities, they built Chinatown
Yeah, I
underground.
think that's not even
In
surprising.
1969, the mayor of Oklahoma City and others visited the mythical city, entering through a door in an alley between California and Sheridan Streets. It was no myth at all. Led by Uncle Willie Hong, the Chinese developed a vast community of rooms with sleeping quarters, living areas, and kitchens. It was said to be 100 people living underground in OKC. There were 2 levels under the basement level, with a burial area and a Buddhist temple. A group of health inspectors reported the community clean and in line with all health standards after a visit in 1921. Much better conditions than underground Chinatowns in other cities. Many underground tunnels and passageways exist today under downtown Oklahoma City. Despite urban renewal, evidence suggests that these are some of the same tunnels the Chinese built. No wonder there's a Chinese restaurant downtown underground in Oklahoma City. To stay up on your hidden histories and the unrivaled history of Oklahoma, lock in with me. Truly your #1 history influencer.
This is the secret history of America. As children, we were taught that the Spaniards came over and found an indigenous and savage people. But what the history books don't tell you is that there was an advanced civilization here already.
Come on now.
Archaeologists were dumbfounded when they found hundreds of giant-sized mummies in burial mounds. These discoveries led a British prospector named J.C. Brown to travel to a place called Mount Shasta in California. He found a cave at the base of the mountain that spiraled 11 miles into the earth. And it was there that he found an ancient underground city. Inside, he found gold and silver and giant, colossal weapons, but there was no people anywhere. And it was only on his way out that he found thousands of mummies buried inside another cave. He brought back one of the skeletons and wanted to share this news with the world. So he put together a team of scientists and miners to go back into the cave. But on the day of the departure, J.C. Brown was murdered in his tent. One witness said they had seen a tall and hairy bipedal creature leaving his tent that night. The team was disbanded, and the location of the entrance to the cave was forever unknown. Later, explorers trying to find this ancient city would describe strange experiences with tall people that they met in the wilderness. Now, most of Mount Shasta is privately owned, and if you go onto these properties, you're escorted away from the mountain. Though we've now discovered hundreds of giant mummies, scientists believe that they're all fake. But even today, people still search for these ancient and advanced lost cities.
Who was the
Nah, that ain't necessarily true. So this is what happens though when they find these mummies, bro. Whenever there's like a discovery of like big ass skeletons, giants per se, look, man, it's only so much you can do before y'all get there, before the government come and take that thing over and bully you and take over your whole thing. They make a government property classified. You can get whoop de whoop whoop if you disclose this. That's how a lot of things don't get put out to the public. Things like that. So you got to watch out for that.
The worst white ally in American history. When we think of white Americans that see themselves as allies to the black community, the examples of those who do more harm than good are endless. And this is because a lot of them are not willing to learn and put in the work to actually advance the cause of racial justice, but others just simply have ulterior motives. But whatever the reason, none are worse than this man, Jim Jones. Jones was a preacher who started his own racially integrated church in the 1950s. His church actually attracted black people more than black-led churches because of his unmatched level of social and political activism. He was actively involved in racial justice organizing, he ran social programs for incarcerated youth, and he and his wife were the first white family in Indiana to adopt a black baby. His congregation, called the People's Temple, was about 80% black, and most of this group were black women specifically. But in the 70s, he moved his congregation to Guyana in pursuit of a beautifully racially inclusive society, and this is where things start to get dark. Jones' congregation started looking more like a cult as people were forced to stay in the compound even as resources dwindled and the living experience declined
only a matter of
severely.
time.
And after being found out, Jones coerced almost 1,000 of his followers, most of which were black.
It's about a matter of time before he started doing weird shit to black people, man. Like, the fuck?
To drink poison
What y'all thought it was
Flavorade,
gonna be?
one of the largest murder-suicide events in world history. The common phrase, "don't drink the Kool-Aid," is in reference to this event. Jones was easily the worst white ally of all time and is a warning of the dangers of charismatic, narcissistic leaders who prey on the hope of marginalized people to serve their own sinister interests.
Right.
Share with anyone who might learn something new and follow for more.
Jesus Garcia,
Right.
the hero of Nacosari. Jesus was a Mexican railroad brakeman. He was widely respected by his peers at the early age of 21. On September 7th, 1907, he was called in to fill in for a job for a conductor who called in sick. And of course, just like any other day, he said yes. During that trip, a series of unfortunate events would unfold. The coal that was used for that train was releasing a lot of sparks, and the tool that they had to control it wasn't working properly. They made a quick pit stop to El Seis, where an employee filled the train with dynamite to take to Nacosari.
What else?
During that trip, there were very high winds, and because of the coal already sparking, it started a fire in the train. And because the train was so long and the loud nature of the train, it was very hard to communicate it with the crew. And at this point, they're already near Nacosari. This fire is going to get bigger and it's going to blow up the train because of the loads of dynamite. Jesus, he had to come with the decision of like, what do I do? Because he's already entering Nacosari. If the train blows up in this pueblo, it will destroy the whole pueblo. He told his crew, jump off, and he's going to accelerate it and get as far away from the pueblo. They all jump out of the train. He takes off. He goes super fast, miles away in open land. The train blows up. And this explosion was so huge that even being miles away, it shattered windows in the pueblo of Nacosari.
Oh, damn.
So unfortunately, he did lose his life, but he saved the lives of many others.
I got a thing though. Look, man, y'all be honest with yourselves. Y'all going down in history like that? Like, you know, look, you read about that type of stuff in books and everything else, but how many people in real life is about that life? I think like a 0.01% people, man, is about that right there. You know, that sacrifice thing for a greater purpose. You know, like that shit's crazy though when you think about it. Like, he deserves to be read about. That's wild.
Diving into the first chapter.
Hopefully you'll never have to do
book,
anything like that.
Of the world in the beginning.
But when it comes
If
to
this
it,
video found you on your For You page, you might have had a past life in a mystery school, or you're just ready to learn some deeper knowledge. So this is the story of creation of the universe that is taught to the initiates in these mystery schools. So this drawing shows the creation of the universe. God reflected on himself. I'm nothing right now. What if I could be something? God imagined a world, imagined a universe with beings just like him. So this concept is actually called idealism, where it is the mind before matter universe instead of the popularized, what we know in science today, matter before mind. Meaning out of the mind came matter instead of matter, you know, things evolve and then consciousness came. No, we're talking about mind came first. When they say we were made in God's image, they don't mean our physical body. God made us in his image in terms of consciousness. Our consciousness is similar to his consciousness or her consciousness. I'm going to read a quote from the book. For science, the great miracle to be explained is the physical universe. For esoteric philosophy, the greater miracle is human consciousness. So just like in the physical world, there are laws to keep things in balance, hot and cold, winter, summer. Our consciousness also has these same laws of balance. We have just the right amount of emotions, just the right amount of memory. We don't have too much memory where we can't move forward into the future, and we don't have too little memory where we forget who we are. As an initiate, you learn that your consciousness is basically the same as God consciousness. This way, they are able to manipulate reality using their mind. So, mystery schools in Asia, they had a practice where they would look at a wooden snake, and if they concentrated hard enough, the wooden snake would be moving. And if your concentration was really good, other people could see this live moving snake as well. Again, these initiates learn how powerful their mind is and how they can manipulate reality through it. We already know that our thoughts create reality, but it gets deeper than that. God created the universe. Just like when a mother creates a child, that child can grow up, make its own decisions. Same thing, when we think about something, that thought is its own being. It can make its own decisions, and it takes a mind of its own. Next chapter, we're going to dive into what consciousness of these initiates were like. Again, way different from what we know as consciousness today.
The Amazon.
That is very damn interesting. You know, like speaking about consciousness and having a God consciousness and stuff like that. These mystery schools are amazing. It gives you something else to think about, you know, a different way to think about things. You know what's crazy though? I found out about learning in general, these different topics and stuff, like information that's actually useful for you know, the development of your mind to grow up and be a person that can be somebody that can benefit your community. You know, you could be a benefit to your community. This is different thinkers. This is different people that's going to stimulate something in you in order for you to change something. You might change the world someday. You might have a different thought, a different way to manipulate our environment in a more natural way. And you know, I'm just saying, because the possibilities are endless. We are very powerful beings and we have to start acting like such, you know? But yeah.
Is a colossal mystery. First of all, to give some basic figures, the Amazon basin is huge. Within it, 5.5 million square kilometers remains almost entirely unstudied by archaeologists. 5.5 million square kilometers is the size of the entire Indian subcontinent. So it's like saying, we've done world archaeology, but we've just ignored India. You know, the Amazon rainforest is literally being cut down. And in that cutting down process has emerged things that shouldn't be there at all. For example, evidence that large cities flourished in the Amazon. Incredible cities, advanced arts and crafts, millions of people, a thriving culture. And then in the last decade, as the clearances of the Amazon have proceeded, we've begun to see the traces of those cities. Within 50 years, they were completely overgrown by the jungle, and that's why they were not seen by the explorers who came in 100 years later. But now the jungle's being cleared, those cities are emerging.
So yesterday I made a video about white celebrities who come from slave-owning families. But in response, a bunch of people commented that I shouldn't punish these celebrities for something that their ancestors did that they had no control over. And to that I say, how do you define punishment and who is calling for them to be punished? Now I can't remember where it comes from, but there's a quote that basically says, when injustice becomes so normalized, any resistance to it can feel like injustice in itself. And this is kind of related to the imagery of a spoiled child who usually gets whatever they ask for, but the first time they don't get what they want, they throw a tantrum because they feel like they're being wronged or punished. For the past few centuries, black people, more often than not, have been forced to keep quiet about the devastation that European empires brought around the world through colonization and slavery. And right now, the biggest taboo seems to be discussing the ongoing beneficiaries of those historical injustices in the modern day. And yes, we can also think critically and realize that these people didn't choose the families they were born into. But on one hand, as black descendants of slavery, we are constantly confronted with the generational traumas from what European imperialism did to our families. To this day, we are stereotyped based on the racist tropes that started during slavery. We are cut off from familial ties because of the slave trade and the buying and selling of our people. And relevant to this discussion, we face some of the largest racial wealth gaps because of our inability to acquire generational assets and participate in our country's economies for centuries. But on the other hand, when it comes to discussing people who financially and socially benefited through generations after slavery, talking about that history and even floating the idea that they could use their inheritance to advance racial equity is punishment? I'm sorry, but compiling publicly available data about the families that took part in the institution of slavery and the descendants who benefited from that oppression might not be common in our hush-hush society, but it's definitely not punishment. Starting a discussion on how those families might go about sharing the wealth that they acquired through human rights abuses is not punishment. Many people have a very uninformed and warped perspective on what reparations might look like and how they work because of conservative talking points, but there's a lot of precedent for it, even for injustices that happened to previous generations. And it's not the exaggerated public crucifixion that some of you make it out to be. But out of all the options we have to reckon with the transatlantic slave trade and the modern society built off of it, the last one that I will consider will be to shut up and pretend no one benefits from it today. If that's what you call punishment, that's on you.
This is important information. Hopefully, that's why you're here, because we live in Oregon, right? But I think it's actually important information as a case study for the larger society, because the ideas that founded Oregon are the same ideas that founded the United States. The United States as a nation was founded as a white homeland, right? And if you go back and read the text from those folks who came and colonized, this is the undergirding of manifest destiny, right? The idea that God gave this land to white folks to make profitable, and that they had the right to do anything necessary to indigenous folks to take that land because they weren't using it properly, right? Including enslave African folks and bring them here to work as chattel slavery.
Hey, y'all heard how she said that, right? See, we're finally really getting to the truth and not the facts. Facts aren't the truth. We're finally getting to the truth of who was really here and what really happened. It's not what history says it is, what they taught in school.
That is the creation of our nation, is the creation of a white homeland. Oregon is reflective of that. So we can look at Oregon as a very useful case study, because the thing about Oregon that is unique, really the only thing about Oregon that is unique, is that they were bold enough to write it down. Right? But these same ideologies, practices, and principles shaped every state in this nation as well as this larger nation. So Oregon is useful because they wrote it down and reaffirmed it again and again. So we don't have to, say, well, this is what I think they were saying, or this is what I feel like that. They were like, no, look, we'll write it down again, just in case you didn't get it the first time. And I think that it's important to recognize that the mechanisms of control that were used in Oregon to control this Black population that was free and unwanted are ultimately the same mechanisms that were used to control the larger Black population once slavery ended in this country. So Jim Crow slavery, or Jim Crow segregation, was much more advanced in Oregon because folks had been practicing it for, a couple decades before the end of slavery. So in many ways, sadly, Oregon is a precursor and an example for the rest of the country about how to control this Black population when slavery is no longer an option. And in fact, this leads to Oregon being called things like the most segregated city north of the Mason-Dixon line. And I think, one really useful example to look at is the example of the Klan. I think that, again, we tell historical inaccuracies about the Klan, that we really simplify this narrative to make ourselves more comfortable. So the way that we talk about the Klan is that the Klan is something that existed up until the 50s and 60s in the rural South. It was predominantly working class, uneducated, rural Southern white men, and by and large, it has died out, right? None of those are true, honestly. So the Ku Klux Klan at its height had a membership of 15% of the eligible population of America, which meant white men. So 15%, 15% of white men were card-carrying members of the Ku Klux Klan at its height in the 1920s. So, Amnesty International is now
like an army
of the population. And
sure.
The Humane Society, right? We love puppies, we love kitties, they don't have 15%, right? So I think it's incredibly important to recognize what 15% of the population means. And that Oregon had the highest per capita Klan membership in the country. And again, this is at a time where the Black population was about 2,500 people, maybe, right? So the question becomes, why would so many folks want to be card-carrying members of the Klan? Again, it is about sending a message about the kind of community folks want to live in by saying, by this membership in the Klan, this is part and parcel of the kind of community I want to live in. I think the other piece about this is that often folks say, okay, well, there were a lot of stupid people in the country. 15% of the, population of white men were stupid, whatever, right? I think it's incredibly important to recognize that the reach of the Klan reached to the highest levels of power, both in Oregon and in the larger nation. So actually, Oregon had a Klan governor. Walter Pierce was a card-carrying member of the Klan.
This is Minnie Lee and Mary Alice Ralph. On June 14th, 1973, these two teenage sisters were sterilized without their consent. Welcome back to Hidden Medical History. Let's talk about Ralph v. Weinberger. The Ralph sisters were the youngest of 6 children and lived in Montgomery, Alabama. Both their parents couldn't read or write. Their family was poor and eventually moved into public housing. While living there, the family planning department began involuntary experimenting on poor Black women with birth control injections. On June 13th, 1973, a nurse told the Ralph sisters' mother that they would need more shots. Mrs. Ralph, who couldn't read or write, signed the consent form believing that her kids were going to get shots. The next day, their dad went to go visit his daughters in the hospital, but was turned away because visiting hours were over. It wasn't until 3 days later that he saw the surgical scars and realized that his daughters had been surgically sterilized. Thanks to a lawsuit, the Ralphs filed a class action lawsuit and won. It resulted in a prohibition of the use of federal funds for involuntary sterilization. Today, the Ralph sisters are only 61 and 63. It's thanks to this lawsuit that doctors are now required to get informed consent before sterilization procedures.
Do you know about the
That's wild, man. They always try to pick on the weak. I'm telling you, once they sniff out, figure out who weak out here, that's who they target, man. And they think they can get over on you, you know, because they feel like you're less educated. That's why we tell y'all to read, educate yourself. I don't want to overtalk this video. I want y'all to really consume this.
You see the Virgin Mary? That image was actually given to us by the colonizers. The real image of the Virgin Mary is very different, and her name wasn't La Virgen Guadalupe. It was actually called Tonantzin.
I always thought she was universal. So there's another Virgin Mary?
When they would pray to the Virgin Mary, they would use it and actually praying to Tonantzin. They would just use the Virgin Mary image so they won't get killed.
So they're praying to their God?
Yeah, they're praying to their God, which is Mother Earth.
It's still the mother of Jesus.
No, it's not.
No, it's not, because it's a different religion that you're facing. So when the colonizers came in, they took away your religion and put Catholics. So our Virgin Mary is the Virgin Mary. That's the religion we grew up on. But if it was like ancestor-wise, then Tonantzin would have been the religion we would have grown up with.
That's the question I always had. Because it always seemed different. Because they would, like, in Mexico, they worship Virgin Mary way more than we'll do over here. Did you guys know that Thomas Edison was Mexican?
What?
In Sombrerete, Zacatecas, Mexico, there's a house with a bronze plaque that reads, Thomas Alva Edison was born in this house, February 18th, 1848. Although it is officially said that he was born in Milan, Ohio, there is no official U.S. birth certificate of Thomas, which was pretty common at this time. But church records in Sombrerete show that there is a man named Samuel Alva who was married to a white lady who had a son named Thomas. There are records he went to a school in Sombrerete. A former teacher was interviewed by a newspaper saying he had Thomas Edison in his class but was going off the name Thomas Alva. There's a conspiracy that Thomas Edison had a hearing loss and that was the reason for a lot of his mispronunciation. Was the pronunciation really because English wasn't his first language? A fact was that Edison did speak perfect Spanish, but his cover-up was that he said he learned it for a convention that he had in Brazil.
They speak Portuguese!
Exactly. In the 1930s, letters written in perfect Spanish surfaced in San Martín de los Pirámides, the birthplace of Thomas Alva's father, coming from Thomas Edison a couple years before his death, where apparently he was trying to track down his distant relatives.
More like his father.
Weirdly though, there was a book of records with all the dates of births and deaths and marriages and
all right, y'all, look, that's the end of that video right there, but hopefully y'all got something from this video. Look, man, just know that the more that we learn about us, ourselves, everything around us, other people, really get to the understanding of everything, man. Look at things from a different perspective, man. Grow up a little bit, dust ourselves off, man. Stand up tall, really find out who you are, people. Put your feet in the grass and take care of your family, yo. Stay grounded. That's all I'm saying. But look, like I always say, spread love because there's too much hate in this world. I love you guys. I see you on the next video. And I'm out, though. Bye.